The restaurant went
Welcome, ma'am.
silent the moment her hands started moving. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped.
Welcome, ma'am.
Because the shy waitress who'd been invisible for 6 months just did something impossible. She signed to the Korean Mafia boss's deaf mother. And now he's staring at her like he's deciding whether to protect her or bury her. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you love tales of unexpected courage, forbidden connections, and life-changing moments, hit that subscribe button for K-Pop Tale Studios. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Imani adjusted her black uniform for the 4th time that evening, her hands betraying what her face refused to show. At 23, she'd perfected the art of invisibility. 6 months at Hanul Court had taught her to move through the dining room like smoke. Present but intangible, necessary but forgettable. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of Seoul's elite, people who never worried about rent or whether they'd have enough left over after paying bills. Imani understood that anxiety intimately. It lived in her bones, shaped every decision she'd made since leaving Busan 3 years ago with nothing but a backpack and her sister's goodbye letter. Table assignments are posted. Manager Choi called out, his voice tight with unusual tension. The Kong family has reserved the entire private section. Do not approach unless summoned. Do not make eye contact. Do not. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The Kong family, even their name, seemed to drop the temperature in the room. Imani had heard the whispered stories about Jaehoon Kong, the youngest son whose cold eyes could freeze blood, about power that stretched far beyond restaurant reservations into the dark corners of Seoul's underworld. When the doors opened at precisely 8 o'clock, the entire staff straightened instinctively. Jaehoon Kong entered first, tall, immaculate in a black suit that whispered of Italian tailors and old money. His presence filled the space with unspoken authority, each step deliberate, calculated. But it was the woman beside him who made Imani's breath catch. Madame Kim Kong moved with the elegance of someone accustomed to deference. Her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, her eyes intelligent and warm despite the careful distance she maintained from the world around her. Imani busied herself at a far table, hoping to avoid their section entirely. She'd survived this long by staying beneath notice. By being the waitress, no one remembered serving them. But then Madam Kim began gesturing. Quick pause. I know 90% of you are watching without subscribing. If you're enjoying this story, it literally takes 1 second to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring you more amazing stories like this one. Don't be part of the 90%. Join the K-Pop Tale Studios family. Her hands moved with increasing urgency, trying to communicate with the server standing frozen beside her table. The young man smiled nervously, nodding without understanding, and Madam Kim's expression shifted from hope to that familiar resignation Imani recognized too well. The look of someone used to being unseen. Another server approached, speaking louder, as if volume might bridge the gap. Manager Choi hurried over, bowing repeatedly, his face flushed with embarrassment at failing Seoul's most dangerous family. Imani's feet moved before her mind could stop them. Excuse me, she said softly, stepping forward. Her heart hammered against her ribs as every eye in the private section turned toward her. May I assist? Without waiting for permission, Imani's hands rose, forming shapes that felt like coming home. Good evening, madam, she signed in fluid Korean Sign Language. How may I help you this evening? The effect was instantaneous. The entire restaurant fell silent. Even the classical music seemed to lower in volume. Madam Kim's eyes widened in surprise. Then her face transformed with pure, radiant joy. It was the smile of someone who'd just been seen for the first time in a very long time. Her hands moved rapidly, excitedly. Oh, how wonderful! You know my language. Across the table, Jehun Kang's head snapped up. His dark eyes locked onto Imani with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The air between them thickened, charged with something Imani couldn't name, but felt down to her bones. "I'm happy to assist," Imani signed back, her hands trembling slightly. "What would you like this evening?" Madam Kim signed enthusiastically about the menu, about how the japchae reminded her of her mother's recipe, asking questions about preparation methods that showed genuine passion for food and connection. They conversed for several minutes, Imani's nervousness melting away as she focused entirely on making this elegant woman feel understood. Finally, Madam Kim reached across the table and gently touched Imani's hand. "Where did you learn to sign so beautifully?" Imani hesitated, aware of Jehun's unrelenting stare. "My younger sister was born deaf," she signed softly. "It was the only way we could truly talk." Something shifted in Madam Kim's expression. Recognition, compassion, connection. She signed one more thing before releasing Imani's hand. "You have kind eyes. Eyes that have known loss." Imani bowed and retreated, her pulse racing. She could feel Jehun's gaze following her across the dining room, could sense the questions forming behind those calculating eyes. She'd broken her cardinal rule. She'd been seen. 2 hours later, as the last patrons filtered out and servers began closing duties, Manager Choi approached Imani with an expression somewhere between fear and awe. "You wanted upstairs," he said quietly. "The private suite. Mr. Kong requested you specifically." Imani's stomach dropped. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just helping." "I know." Manager Choi's voice was gentle, almost pitying. "But with that family, help and harm often look the same. Be careful, Imani." The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending toward judgment. When the doors opened, Imani found herself in a suite that overlooked all of Seoul, the city lights spreading below like a carpet of stars. Jehun stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette framed by the glowing city. He didn't turn when she entered. "You speak to my mother in a language even I never learned," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the space between them. "That earns my respect." He turned then, his face half in shadow, half in gold from the city lights. But it also raises questions. Imani's mouth went dry. "I only wanted to help Mr. Kong." "Help," he repeated as if testing the word. He took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "Do you know how many people have tried to use my mother's silence to get close to me? To hurt her? I would never." "I know," he interrupted, surprising her. "If you were a threat, you wouldn't still be standing here." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But you're hiding something, Miss Carter. And I always discover what people are hiding." The way he said her name, as if he already knew it wasn't entirely true, sent ice down her spine. Imani didn't yet know that one simple gesture of kindness had just changed her entire fate. She didn't know that the invisible life she'd so carefully constructed was about to crumble, revealing truths she'd spent 3 years running from. All she knew was that Jehun Kong was watching her with eyes that saw too much, and that somehow impossibly she just stepped into a world where kindness and danger were the same face. Subscribe to K-Pop Tale Studios so you don't miss what's coming. And comment below what time you're watching this. Are you Team Jehun or Team Imani should run? Let us know. The investigation is about to begin, and Imani's secrets won't stay buried for long. Imani's simple act of kindness caught the attention of Jehun Kong, a man who sees everything, forgets nothing, and now has questions she can't afford to answer. The next morning, Imani arrived at Hanul Court, hoping the previous night had been some strange fever dream. But the way her coworkers stared at her, a mixture of awe and pity, confirmed that everything had been painfully real. I heard Mr. Kong kept you upstairs for 20 minutes, Sujin whispered while they folded napkins in the service area. Nobody talks to him that long and comes back unchanged. It was nothing, Imani lied, her hands moving mechanically through the familiar motions. He just wanted to thank me for helping his mother. Sujin's expression said she didn't believe a word. He's requested you again tonight. Private tea service in the garden room at 7. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Imani, the Kong family doesn't do nothing. Whatever this is, be careful. If you're already hooked on this story, smash that subscribe button for K-Pop Tale Studios. You definitely don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's get to 100K subscribers. At exactly 7 o'clock, Imani entered the garden room with a tray of tea, her pulse thrumming in her throat. The space was intimate, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private courtyard, minimalist furniture, and soft lighting that made shadows dance across the walls. Jaehoon sat by the window, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. He'd removed his suit jacket, his white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows in a way that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. Miss Carter, he greeted, gesturing to the seat across from him. Please join me. It wasn't a request. Imani poured the tea with hands that refused to shake, pride warring with fear. Your tea, Mr. Kong. Huangcha, as requested. You have excellent pronunciation, he observed, watching her over the rim of his cup. But your accent is interesting. It shifts. He tilted his head slightly. Your employment file says you're from Busan. 3 years in Seoul, working your way through translation courses at Hanyang University's online program. The fact that he'd memorized her file should have surprised her. It didn't. That's correct, Imani said carefully. Is it? Jaehoon's smile didn't reach his eyes. Because you speak like someone raised in Jeonju, not Busan. The vowel patterns are distinct, especially when you're nervous. Like now. Imani's chest tightened. She'd worked so hard to neutralize her accent, to blend in. My stepfather was from Jeonju. I suppose I picked up his speech patterns. Your stepfather, Jaehoon repeated, setting down his cup with deliberate precision. Korean. And your mother? Ghanaian, Imani said quietly. She passed away when I was 16. Something flickered in Jaehoon's expression. Sympathy, perhaps, or calculation. I'm sorry for your loss. And your father? There it was. The question she'd been dreading. I never knew him, Imani said, which wasn't entirely a lie. She'd known of him, had seen photographs, heard stories. But known him? No. Jaehoon leaned back, studying her with that unnerving intensity. You're an interesting puzzle, Miss Carter. A woman with a Ghanaian mother and an absent father, raised by a Korean stepfather from Jeonju, somehow ending up at Seoul's most exclusive restaurant serving my family. He paused. People like you don't end up at Hanul Court by coincidence. Someone recommended you. Who was it? The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. I applied online, Imani finally said. Manager Choi hired me based on my interview and references from my previous job in Itaewon. Manager Choi, Jaehoon murmured, as if making a mental note to question him later. His gaze never left her face. You're lying. Not about everything, but about enough. I'm not. You are. He stood, moving to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. You flinch when my head of security walks by. You avoid the north dining room where certain family associates eat. And yesterday, when I mentioned the Jang family business proposal, your hand trembled so badly you nearly dropped a plate. Imani's blood ran cold. She hadn't realized he'd been watching that closely, cataloging every minute reaction. I don't know what you think I'm hiding, she said, forcing steel into her voice. but I'm just a waitress trying to finish school and build a life here. That's all. Jehun turned, and the smile he gave her was almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. We both know that's not all, Miss Carter. The question is whether you'll tell me the truth, or whether I'll have to discover it myself. He moved closer, and Imani caught the scent of his cologne, expensive and subtle. I always discover the truth. When she finally left, her legs felt like water. She caught his reflection in the mirrored wall as she walked away, his gaze fixed on her, unreadable, calculating. He wasn't just suspicious. He was already hunting. The following week brought an unexpected reprieve. Madam Kim requested Imani accompany her for afternoon walks through the restaurant's private gardens. They would stroll among the cherry trees, communicating in sign language, while Madam Kim's security detail maintained a respectful distance. My son thinks everyone has an agenda, Madam Kim signed one afternoon, her expression wistful. He's been hurt too many times, betrayed by people we trusted. I understand, Imani signed back. Trust is earned, not given. Madam Kim smiled, touching Imani's cheek gently. You're wise for someone so young. Jehun needs someone who sees him as a man, not a title or a threat. Someone who understands that strength and kindness can coexist. That night, as Imani walked home through the quiet streets of Itaewon, she noticed the black sedan. It idled at the corner, windows tinted, engine running. When she turned toward her apartment building, it followed at a careful distance. Her hands trembled as she unlocked her door. She was being watched, followed, investigated. The invisible life she'd built was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The next evening, after her shift ended, Manager Choi approached with an expression that made her stomach drop. Mr. Kong is waiting for you outside. His car. The black sedan sat at the curb, gleaming under the streetlights. The door opened as Imani approached, revealing Jehun in the back seat, his face half-shadowed. Get in, he said quietly. Imani slid in, her heart hammering. The door closed with a solid click that sounded too much like a trap snapping shut. Jehun handed her a sealed envelope, his expression unreadable. Open it. With shaking hands, Imani broke the seal. Inside were photographs, old, slightly faded. Her breath caught. Her father, younger than she remembered him, standing outside what looked like a warehouse, and beside him, a man with a tattoo visible on his forearm. She recognized that symbol. Everyone in Seoul's underworld would. The crest of the Beck family, the Kong syndicate's most dangerous rivals. Tell me, Miss Carter, Jehun said quietly, his voice soft but edged with steel. Did your father work for my enemies or for me? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Imani couldn't begin to untangle. Outside the car, Seoul moved on. People walking to dinners they'd finish, homes they'd return to, lives that weren't balanced on the edge of a knife. Imani's world had just narrowed to this moment, this man and this impossible question, and she had no idea how to answer without destroying everything. What? Did you see that twist coming? Subscribe to K-Pop Tales Studios and hit the notification bell. Drop a comment telling us. Do you think Imani's father worked for the Kangs or against them? And what time are you watching this? The truth is about to come out, and it's going to change everything. The photographs trembled in Imani's hands, the faces staring back at her from a past she'd tried so hard to bury. Her father's smile, carefree, unaware of the darkness that would eventually swallow him whole. He was innocent, Imani whispered, her voice cracking. My father was a security officer at the Ghanaian embassy. He worked night shifts, came home smelling like coffee and old books. She looked up at Jehun, tears threatening to spill. He disappeared when I was 12. One night, He went to work and never came home. Jehun's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes, calculation or perhaps doubt. The man in the photograph, he pressed. I don't know him. It was the truth. My father never talked about his work, never brought it home. When he vanished, the embassy said there was no record of his employment that week, like he'd been erased. Her voice hardened. So no, Mr. Khan, I don't know if he worked for your enemies or for you or for someone else entirely. I was 12. All I know is he disappeared, and my mother died trying to find answers. The silence in the car was suffocating. Outside, Seoul continued its glittering indifference, neon signs reflecting off rain-slicked streets. Get out, Jehun said finally, his voice flat. Imani's heart sank. This was it. She'd be fired or worse. But report to work tomorrow. My mother has requested you specifically for her afternoon appointments. Imani blinked, stunned. You're letting me stay? My mother believes in you, Jehun said, his jaw tight. And I've learned not to ignore her instincts. But Miss Carter, his eyes locked onto hers, dark and dangerous. If I discover you've lied to me, if you're playing some game I haven't figured out yet, there won't be a second conversation. Do you understand? Imani nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Madam Kim's afternoon walks became the highlight of Imani's days. They would sit in the private garden, and the older woman would teach her intimate signs, family expressions, private jokes, the silent language of a mother's love. This sign, Madam Kim showed her, hands forming a delicate gesture, means my heart sees you. I used to sign it to Jehun when he was small, before the world made him hard. Does he remember? Imani signed back. Madam Kim's smile was sad. He pretends not to, but sometimes, when he thinks I'm not looking, he signs it to himself. What Imani didn't see was Jehun watching them from his office window, his expression softening in ways he didn't quite understand. He'd ordered surveillance on her apartment, investigated every detail of her life, and found nothing. No secret meetings, no suspicious contacts. Just a woman who studied late into the night and sent money to her younger sister in Busan every month. It confused him. In his world, everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. But Imani Carter just seemed to want to be invisible, to survive, to build something small and safe in a dangerous city. And somehow, that made her more intriguing than any elaborate deception. Then everything shattered. It was a Tuesday evening when Jehun received the call. 3 of his secure meeting locations had been compromised, addresses known only to his inner circle. 2 business associates had been ambushed. Someone was leaking information. Check everything, he ordered his head of security. Phone records, security footage, access logs. Someone in our network is talking. The answer came back within hours. Surveillance footage showed a staff member's ID card being used to access the restricted administrative office at Hanul Court, the office where meeting schedules were kept, where private information was stored. The ID belonged to Imani Carter. The timestamp, 3 hours before the first leak. Jehun stormed into Hanul Court during the height of dinner service, his presence like a cold wind cutting through the warm ambience. Conversations died. Servers froze mid-step. He walked directly to where Imani was serving wine to a table of business executives, his footsteps echoing on marble floors. Everyone out, he said quietly. The diners didn't question him. They simply left, abandoning half-eaten meals and full glasses of wine. Imani stood frozen, the wine bottle still in her hand, as the restaurant emptied until only staff remained watching from the shadows. Jehun slammed her ID card onto the table between them. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. You were right about one thing, he said, his voice lethal in its quietness. You're very good at being invisible. I don't understand. This card, he cut her off, pointing at the ID, accessed a restricted office yesterday at 3:47 p.m. That office contains confidential information. Information that was leaked to my competitors within hours. His eyes were black ice. Explain. I didn't, Imani's voice cracked. I haven't been to the administrative floor in weeks. I don't even know where that office is. Then how did your ID access it? I don't know. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, her composure finally breaking. Someone must have taken it, used it. I keep it in my locker. Anyone could. Convenient, Jehun said coldly. Jehun. The sound came from behind them, a hand slamming on a table. Madam Kim stood at the entrance to the private dining room, her face flushed with anger. She strode forward, her hands moving in sharp, furious gestures. Look at her, she signed, positioning herself between Jehun and Imani. Look at her eyes. She's terrified, not guilty. She's not lying. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. No one had ever seen Madam Kim this angry, had never seen her publicly challenge her son. Jehun's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking in his cheek. For a long moment, he stared at Imani, searching her face for any hint of deception. And for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. But pride and fury won out. You will return to your apartment, he said, his voice like ice. You will not leave. You will not contact anyone. Security will be posted outside until this is resolved. Do you understand? You're confining me? Imani's voice was barely a whisper. I'm keeping you alive, Jehun shot back. If someone is using you to get to me, you're in as much danger as I am. And until I know the truth. He didn't finish. He turned and walked away, his coat billowing behind him like a shadow. Madam Kim reached for Imani's hand, tears in her own eyes, signing desperately he's afraid. He doesn't know how to trust. Please don't give up on him. But Imani couldn't respond. She could barely breathe. That night, confined to her apartment with two of Jehun's men stationed outside, Imani sat by the window watching rain streak down the glass, soul blurred into watercolor smudges of neon and darkness. She tried to be kind, tried to help, and kindness had become a weapon turned against her. In a world that only spoke in threats and power, gentleness was mistaken for deception. Connection was mistaken for manipulation. As the rain fell harder, Imani pressed her forehead against the cold glass and finally allowed herself to break. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the real traitor had been standing beside Jehun all along, watching, waiting, and smiling at how perfectly their plan was unfolding. No way. Subscribe to K-Pop Tales Studios right now and comment what time you're watching this. Who do you think the real traitor is? Jehun sat alone in his office, the city lights of Seoul casting long shadows across his desk. The investigation had taken 72 hours of sleepless pursuit, following digital breadcrumbs and questioning loyal men until their stories cracked. And now he knew. The traitor wasn't Imani Carter. It was Miho Kong, his cousin, his blood, the man he'd trusted to protect his mother. The evidence was undeniable. Encrypted messages to the Beck syndicate, bank transfers to offshore accounts, and security footage showing Miho accessing Imani's locker, stealing her ID card to use as the perfect cover. Why? Jehun had asked when his head of security laid out the proof. Greed, sir, and resentment. After your father's death, Miho believed the family should have been his to lead. He's been selling your secrets to the Becks for 18 months. 18 months. While Jehun had been protecting the family, Miho had been dismantling it from within. Jehun reached for his phone to order Miho's arrest, but it rang before he could dial. Sir, his security chief's voice was urgent, breathless. We intercepted chatter. The Becks are moving tonight. Target, Madam Kim. Her route home from the estate. We have maybe 20 minutes. The phone slipped from Jehun's hand. At the Kong estate, Imani sat in the guest room where she'd been moved after 2 days of apartment confinement. Madam Kim had insisted, signing to her son through tears, that if Imani was to be imprisoned, she would be imprisoned in comfort, where Madam Kim could at least see her. Jehun had relented, though he still refused to speak to Imani directly. Now Imani stared out the window, exhausted and hollow. She'd done everything right, stayed invisible, kept her head down, tried only to survive. And still, the world had found a way to crush her. Voices erupted in the hallway outside, sharp and panicked. Madam Kim's car. Underground garage now. Can't reach Mr. Kong. Imani's blood turned to ice. She threw open the door to find guards sprinting toward the stairs, radios crackling with static and fear. What's happening? She demanded, grabbing one guard's arm. Madam Kim is leaving for her appointment. We have intel of a possible. He stopped himself. Stay here, miss. It's not safe. But Imani was already running. She flew down the marble stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. The estate was a maze of hallways, but she followed the sound of voices, the smell of car exhaust, the instinct that screamed something was terribly wrong. The underground garage was chaos. Guards shouting into phones, engines revving, and there in the center of it all, Madam Kim's black sedan with its door open, the older woman about to step inside. Stop! Imani screamed in Korean, her voice raw. Everyone turned, startled. But Madam Kim, who couldn't hear the warning, continued reaching for the door handle. Imani didn't think. She ran, a full sprint across concrete, her shoes slipping, her breath burning in her lungs. She crashed into Madam Kim, wrapping her arms around the older woman and yanking her backward with all her strength. They hit the ground hard, and the car exploded. The force of it threw them further across the garage floor. Heat seared Imani's back. The sound was deafening, metal tearing, glass shattering, flames roaring to life in a bright orange hell. Shrapnel rained down like deadly hail. Imani curled over Madam Kim, making herself a shield, feeling pieces of glass slice through her uniform, feeling heat blister her skin. The world was fire and noise and terror. And then, gradually, the noise faded to ringing silence. Imani's hands moved automatically, trembling and bloodied. You're safe now, she signed to Madam Kim, who stared up at her with wide, shocked eyes. You're safe. I've got you. Footsteps pounded across concrete. Voices shouted, but Imani couldn't hear them over the ringing in her ears. She stayed curled over Madam Kim, her body a barrier between the woman she'd grown to love and whatever danger might still be coming. Imani. The voice was broken, desperate. Strong hands pulled her back gently, so gently she almost didn't recognize them as Jehun's. He knelt beside them in his expensive suit, now covered in ash and debris, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. His eyes swept over Imani, her torn uniform, the burns on her arms, the blood seeping through fabric, and something in him shattered visibly. Madam Kim's hands moved, trembling so badly she could barely form the signs. But her message was clear. You see? She protected me, not you. It wasn't an accusation. It was a truth that cut deeper than any blade. Jehun looked at Imani, really looked at her, and in his eyes she saw shame, awe, and something that looked dangerously close to anguish. Get them to medical, he ordered, his voice rough. Now. As paramedics rushed forward, Jehun stood, his expression transforming from broken to lethal. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Bring me Miho Kong. Alive. I want him to answer for this. 3 hours later, in a secure room beneath the estate, Miho Kong sat handcuffed to a chair, his face swollen from the beating Jehun's men had given him during arrest. It should have been mine. Miho spat blood onto the floor. The family, the power, father promised me. Then he died and gave it all to you. So you sold us out to the Becks? Jehun's voice was dangerously quiet. You tried to murder my mother. I framed that foreign girl perfectly, Miho laughed bitterly. Planted evidence, used her ID card. You were so eager to believe she was guilty. So desperate to protect yourself that you couldn't see your real enemy was right beside you. Jehun's fist connected with Miho's jaw, snapping his head back. Where's the rest of the Beck cell? Who else is compromised? But even as Miho talked, giving up names to save his own skin, Jehun's mind was elsewhere. In the medical wing upstairs, where Imani Carter lay with burns on her back and glass cuts across her arms, having sacrificed her own safety for his mother without a moment's hesitation. While he had accused her, confined her, refused to believe in her innocence, even when his own mother had vouched for her character. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, Jehun felt the crushing weight of shame. He found Imani sitting up in the medical bed, her back bandaged, her hands wrapped in gauze. Madam Kim sat beside her, holding her hand and crying silently. Jehun stood in the doorway, this man who commanded empires and inspired fear in Seoul's most dangerous circles, and he couldn't find words. Finally, he stepped inside and did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He bowed, deeply, formally, with genuine remorse. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was wrong. About everything. Imani looked at him with those eyes that had haunted him for weeks. Eyes that had seen too much pain, carried too many secrets, but somehow still held kindness. Your mother is safe, she said softly. That's all that matters. But Jehun knew it wasn't all that mattered. Not anymore. For the first time in years, Jehun had apologized to anyone, and he knew that this woman, this shy waitress who'd signed to his mother in a crowded restaurant, had just changed the entire trajectory of his life. If you've made it this far without subscribing to K-Pop Tale Studios, I have to ask, what will it take? We pour our hearts into creating these stories for you. The least you can do is hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us what time you're watching. You do not want to miss how this love story ends. Subscribe now. Before we get to the finale, if you've been following this entire story without subscribing to K-Pop Tale Studios, now is the time. Don't let this be the last story you see from us. Hit that subscribe button. 6 weeks had passed since the explosion, and the Kong estate had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The burns on Imani's back had healed into faint scars, marks she wore as evidence of a choice she'd make again, without hesitation. The fear that had haunted her for 3 years had finally begun to ease. Every Thursday afternoon, the estate's main hall filled with an unlikely sight. Jehun's security team learning sign language from Madam Kim. Communication saves lives, Madam Kim would sign at the beginning of each lesson, and the hardened men would nod solemnly, their large hands fumbling through gestures with unexpected gentleness. Imani served as translator and assistant. Jehun attended every lesson, practicing signs when he thought no one was watching. The man who had once terrified her with cold suspicion had softened. He smiled more now. He listened. He was becoming himself again. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, Imani helped Madam Kim tend to her cherry blossom trees in the garden. You've given me a daughter, Madam Kim signed. Imani's eyes burned with tears. You've given me a home. Imani. Jehun's voice was soft. Madam Kim smiled knowingly and disappeared into the house. Jehun approached slowly. My mother says you remind her of me. Before the world made me cruel. Maybe you were never cruel, Imani said softly. Just misunderstood. He closed the distance between them. You taught me something no one ever could. That silence isn't weakness. It's strength. Jihoon reached for her hand, his touch gentle. His thumb traced the scars on her palm from the explosion. You saved my mother's life. You saved mine too. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to care about someone without turning it into control. But I want to learn. If you'll teach me. I'm just a waitress who knows sign language, she said with a small smile. You're so much more than that. His hand tightened around hers. You're the first person who saw me as human instead of a weapon. A breeze stirred the blossoms above them, petals falling like pink snow. Madam Kim watched from her balcony, smiling. So what happens now? Imani asked. Jihoon raised his free hand and signed slowly. We begin again. They walked beneath the cherry blossoms, hands intertwined, while Madam Kim watched with tears of joy. And somewhere between danger and grace, a shy waitress and a broken heir found the courage to speak the same language, the one only hearts can understand. You just finished this entire story without subscribing? After everything we gave you? K-Pop Tales Studios crafted this for you. All we ask is one click. Comment, I subscribed. And tell us what time you finished. Show some love and subscribe right now.